I will go ahead and I want to welcome everyone to our 440 Artist Talk. I'm James Acevedo, and today we're featuring Susan Greenstein in her solo show, To Every Season. And we're also pleased to have in the project space, Eclectic Visions with Joanne Acey, Karen Gibbons, and Juliet Martin. And these shows are currently on exhibit at the 440 Gallery through Sunday, November 19th. And I think, are we seeing, should we switch to seeing highlights from the show?
Yes.
Oh, here we go.
Put that on. Let's see. Hold on. Oh, wait, Karen, you're going to start, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Karen will be sharing the screen in a second. But, you know, we're seeing slides, but really I encourage everyone, if possible, and you're in the area, to come by the gallery. We're open Thursday through Sundays and see the work in person. That really is the, to see this wonderful work. But
So we're going through the installation shots, and I have to say that the installation was a very big part of the whole process of my series and you know, putting this show together. I have been working on the series for a year, and I had a lot of work, and I'm comfortable doing the work, but I wasn't so comfortable hanging the work. And we have a committee that, you know, that hangs the work, and magic happened. It was really pretty incredible, just the way everything was organized, and you know, some really wonderful ideas came out in terms of how things were grouped. And I was kind of amazed. It was very exciting for me. So just wanted to mention that.
mm-hmm. And just as a reminder about our format is we ask, we'll be meeting, or I'll be speaking with the artists and asking them questions. And then at the end of both the with the solo show artists and the project artists, we'll have a discussion Q&A. But feel free to post questions into the chat, you know, like if you're thinking something and, you know, and you don't want to forget it, it's fine to put it in the chat. We'll look at it at the end, and the artist can then respond to your questions. Seeing the highlights from our installation, and then I think we go into the reception. Do we see?
Yeah, we're just going around. This is going sort of around the gallery to show people what the way everything is set up. And then this is our project space show. And this was our reception. We had a really rainy night for our reception, and what was really wonderful was we had a really nice showing. A lot of people came, so it was great.
Apparently I get up if it's not admitted. Are you admitting people, Susan? I'm
I
sorry.
admitted, yes, you can't do it when you're sharing. For some reason, you can't do it. So I'll take care of that. No problem.
Okay, I can't advance it for some reason.
Uh-oh,
Are they admitted?
they're admitted. You're still not. You know what? You might want to stop sharing and then restart.
Sorry, everybody. Technical difficulties. Oops. No, I don't want to force quit.
It won't let you stop share?
There
we go.
Okay. Can you see it now?
No, we're back to the unshare.
Sorry, it's
That's okay.
it's acting strange here. But let's try again.
If worse comes to worse, I can share it if, give it another try, but I can always go to the,
I think it's happening. It's happening.
There we go.
more people.
Mhm.
There's Joanne and her beautiful work. And Karen, her amazing piece, me, and Juliet.
Great artist images.
I think Gio
Yeah.
took most of them.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So Susan, congratulations. Wonderful show, beautiful show, amazing show. And I'll be asking you a few questions. The title to every season is certainly clearly seen, and I imagine it like a time lapse. We began with autumn and it's very appropriate to our season, but it's all 4 seasons. I had a question about this. Could you expand on your thoughts and feelings about presenting this exhibit, its genesis, and your personal connections to the subject?
Sure. I wrote some things down, so I'm going to read from that. And then perhaps I'll add a little bit more. So I started this series over a year ago. I've always loved including trees in my paintings, but I had never decided to dedicate my focus fully to trees. I discovered that this was a very exciting focus for me. Somehow the combination of predictability and symmetry of trees versus the wild unpredictability of them as well caught my attention. This is something that I've noticed and embraced in many paintings of plants and flowers through the years. But now I turned my focus fully to trees.
I noticed that in your artist statement, in your artist statements, you mentioned that these are painted on plein air. I think that's how it's said.
Yes.
Meaning that it's outdoors, you go out, you set up your materials, and you're directly observing. It's not, say, from a photograph, and it's not done in your studio.
Right.
To me, that's an extremely challenging method. As an artist, it's very hard for me to work that way. I'm too self-conscious. But I'm curious, what was your path to work this way? The difficulties and the challenges that you see, or perhaps, for you now, there's no challenge. I'm very interested in your working method.
Well, thank you for asking that. So I've been enjoying on plein air painting for a very long time, probably about 35 years or so. And the qualities that I love about working that way is the fact that 2 different days of painting will be completely different when I'm outside. And there are definitely always challenges. It can be really windy, it can be too hot, too cold. Sometimes there are noises that, can be very striking, but they almost become part of the whole process for me. And I feel like all of those things really affect how I paint. One of the very, very special parts of this tree series was the connection that I felt with one tree or a grouping of trees. It was just me and this tree and the relationship between us. And that was something I couldn't do if I took photographs and worked from them. It really had to be in the moment. And so sitting with total focus on these trees made me feel a very deep connection to them. And then one of the things I just wanted to add was that, and I understand, sometimes people can feel very self-conscious painting outside. There's all different levels of things that can happen when you're outside. I've kind of embraced that through the years. And I actually love when people come over, unless I'm in a moment where I can't be bothered, and then I have to just politely say that I can't talk right then. But it's kind of like a chance to open up, what I do to other people and share it. So besides having this relationship with what I'm painting, it's also the relationship with the people that are seeing me doing this thing. So.
I also noticed that in your statement, there's a reference to the artist's Arthur Varnstrom, who is new to me, and his haiku in paint series that you cite as being particularly important to this. Could you talk more about how you discovered Varnstrom and what the influence has been?
Sure. At the very beginning of the series, an artist friend suggested that I look at Arthur Varnstrom's work, and I had never heard of him either. And she suggested I look at his haiku paintings specifically. They were a great source of inspiration for me. He pares down his landscapes. These are some examples of his work that are on the screen right now. He pares down his landscapes to a very bare minimum with very few strokes and just the slightest indication of detail. I'm happy that I started out using some of those principles, but my way of seeing through paint and it kind of worked into my work. So I started out, there were a few examples that are much more sparse and spare, but just like any artist, you know, you sort of find your way back into your way of working. But I'm really happy I started out this way. And I feel like I internalized this is one of the ones, this was one of the very early ones. I feel like some of the ideas of his haiku painting approach, I've internalized, and it's definitely become a part of what I'm thinking about when I'm working. He had a quote that I'd like to share that I definitely hold on to and I've really internalized. It's the quote is, "Being present in nature is a deeply spiritual experience that I share through painting. Painting is a meditation on nature akin to poetry." So that's something that I really connected to that in his work.
I think my next question actually also comes from this, and in looking at your series, well, yes, you know, there's the concentration on the subject, the seasons, and I see that, but I find it very interesting how in over this whole series, I see different approaches, not extreme, but you can see that you're working differently in each one. For example, in bare tree grouping, it's almost minimalist, just lines. It almost approaches abstraction, as well as golden orange, the one that you were just showing. And then also, I was very interested in the I think it's called Old Giant Linden, and the scale of that. And I wonder if any of these are new paths that you are thinking about developing a body of work just on one of those approaches.
Well, I feel like I'm still involved in this series. It's not over for me. I feel really grateful that I had a moment where I could bring this work together and kind of reflect on it as a group of pieces, but I feel like I almost just scratched the surface. But I did discover through this series, just as you pointed out, that I love changing the scale. Like that's something that I really discovered through this experience. Sometimes, you know, working small, sometimes working much larger. I learned that well, for me, it's an invitation in the smaller ones to abbreviate my choices when I'm working that size. And it helps me to define the essence of the trees. Moving to a much larger size. This one in particular is much larger than I usually work. And it really pushed me to think about things in a new way, to really think much more specifically about the textures of things and just the breadth of a tree, you know, just the reach of a tree. And of course, you know, so I'm really interested in pushing that. I'm hoping to maybe make some even larger paintings and then making some even smaller paintings, you know, and continuing the middle-sized ones as well. But I'd really like to push that because I found that has pushed me, to just think about things in a little bit of a different way. So thanks for asking that.
And this particular one is a favorite of mine, and an example of why it's very important to go to a gallery and see the work. Like seeing it here on the screen, it's great, it's nice to see, but it's only when you're standing in front of it do you actually see this is an incredible work. I think,
Thank you so much.
I love this work, the size, but yet the how fluid it is in its making. It's a very successful work, and I congratulate you on that. I'm envious of your ability. So thank you
Thank you.
for bringing the work for us to see in your words. And just to repeat, this exhibit is up through Sunday, November 19th. So everyone still has a chance to see it as of this time.
Thank
So
you very much.
I think now we are going to switch the shared screen
Yes.
as we move to the project
Yes.
space.
And Susan, there's someone to admit, please.
I know I can't. It's funny right now. I can't admit them, I think, because, okay, now I can.
Now I can.
Okay. Oh, now you can. Okay, great. Terrific. Okay. Did you admit them?
They're admitted and.
Okay, great.
now you
Okay,
s-
so now I am going to share my screen.
Thank
Forgive us for the little bit of technical complication here. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Um,
So now we've moved to the back of our 440 gallery, where which we call the project space, where we each month have a group show of 3 of the member artists. And this month, the show is entitled Eclectic Visions, and it showcases work by Joanne Acey, Karen Gibbons, and Juliet Martin. And I think we do have, will we jump directly into the artist's work? I don't think we have an overview of it at this point.
That
So,
was included in the, it was included
right.
in the earlier ones, yes.
Okay, that's great. So now we'll be viewing the work of Joanne Acey. Joanne, congratulations on this beautiful group show. Eclectic Visions alludes to different views. But as we often note in these shows, the different artists' work, once they're brought together, it seems to mesh. What's your sense of the eclecticism of the show and your take on the title?
Well, I think in the beginning, I really didn't see a close connection of the work itself, but I do think that one thing that the show does do, it really emphasizes the different approaches and materials that artists use. I think the thing that binds the show together has more to do with the individual artists' responses, whether they be emotional or personal events that brought them to these images. And I think that's quite evident in the show when you're looking at the individual works of the artists. I also think that the title could possibly describe my work as an artist, because I do many different things. I paint, I draw, I print, I collage, and also the subject matter, although mostly most of my work is abstract, but I think that there's always something that's consistent but changes from one material to another. I think you still recognize it as my work, but I do like to go back and forth with different materials. So in some way, the title, I think, does describe how I work as an artist.
Mhm.
So.
Well, I'm fascinated by the emotional space that you create in your abstract work. and I've seen your work now through several shows like Urban Beats, Swing and Dreaming, where I've observed that the space that you create, and this is just a very general comment, that it appears to be that it's object filled, whereas this work, to me, and I see it. This is not a criticism. It's beautiful. It's, to me, I refer to it as spatial. That we're entering into this space. We're not necessarily like encountering things. It really is to draw you into the space. And I just wonder if this is a conscious change, evolution, or I don't know, maybe it's just that it's this work, or the materials, as you just mentioned.
Well, I think, and these three pieces that we're looking at, they have a lot to do with the landscape and seascape. And I think those two things, landscape, excuse me, and seascape, are vast open images. So I think that in itself makes these much more open and vast in terms of the space. So sometimes it's the subject or the thing that I'm thinking or referring to that's going to dictate what that space becomes. And some of the shows that you mentioned, for instance, Urban Beat. There were two urban series, Urban Stories and then Urban Beat. And Urban Beat had to do with collage, and it was very tight, and there was just so much going on in each piece. And then in Urban Stories, it was the same kind of thing. It was also Urban Stories was a pastel series, but it was really based on a city view that I had of tall buildings, one after another, and tall and steel and lots of windows. So those works, the space was very different. It was very congested in a way. So I think the subject, what I'm trying to convey, is what's going to determine what kind of a space I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. I know you're in Martha's Vineyard right now.
Mm-hmm.
Does the seascape there or the landscape inspire you? Are you drawing? Are we going to see?
And unlike Susan, I'm not painting on site. Most of my work, I don't use photographs. Sometimes when I begin a series, I might know that it's going to be a seascape, because those parts of my life, like just sitting somewhere and just looking into this vastness. I could spend hours doing that. I mean, I'm a daydreamer. And so I think landscape and seascape even enters into my work over and over again over all these years that I've been working. I'm sitting in this room, and my sister has so many of my older pieces here, and there's always something that comes back that I revisit over and over again.
And then would you say that you work from memory, that when you go into the studio, there's something you've been, like, I don't know, you've been looking at the ocean in Martha's Vineyard, and that's in your mind, and then you're in the studio, and that then becomes the work?
I would say memory and imagination. I mean, I paint landscapes sometimes, and people will say to me, did you live in the South Pacific? I might put something there that conjures that. Each time I begin a piece or a series, I don't always know where it's going to go. Sometimes, like this piece here, maybe I might have thought, well, that's going to be more black and white. And then somehow I just keep working. And then I think, oh, I think I'm going to put the sea in this now, or I'm going to put the sky. And so imagination and memory, and a lot of emotional memories, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question about the materials. I know that in your last solo show, you used flash, which is a very, it's a paint, very matte, opaque, covers, but wonderful color. And here you're exhibiting pastels. I'm interested to hear your observations about the differences in media and how that affects the work that develops, or do you choose the medium and go to the work, or is there the work and it tells you what medium to choose?
I think I begin knowing that I'm going to paint. All right. When I start, and I always work in series. It's like writing a book for me. There's chapter after chapter after chapter. But for instance, if I'm going to use pastel, I know that day I'm going into the studio and I'm going to pick up my pastel. But with the flash paint, many years ago, I only worked in oil as far as painting. I did some watercolor, but I would say that oil paint was my main medium. And I moved into a much smaller studio a few years back, and there's no ventilation. And I didn't feel, I really couldn't work in oil. And I used to work very large. So I began to work on wood, and I began to work on paper, and I began to use acrylic. And I had success with it, I think, but it just wasn't really the texture or the finish that I wanted. And then one of my co-members at the gallery, Janet Pedersen, told me about flash, and I got turned on to it right away. As you said, it's a very matte finish, and it's also a vinyl paint. It dries very, very quickly. I think the colors, it was just such a joy to work with these colors because they mix really well. And when the painting is dry, I found that my drawing materials could be utilized on top of the paint, and it took very well. With acrylic, it was a little hard to draw on the surface without it looking really imposed. I think when I draw on top of the flash, I feel like it incorporates, really well. And I could also use even pastel on it and rub my fingers through it. I can scratch through it. I can add ink on top of it, or some kind of a permanent pen. So I really do enjoy using the flash.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful collection, and I look forward to your work when you return from Martha's Vineyard.
I'll be there soon.
Right. So moving on to our next artist, Karen Gibbons. Congratulations, Karen.
Thank you.
But I want to jump in right away to speak about the large work, the work that when you move into the project space, it's right there. It's a large work. It's a wonderful work, very beautiful, but also mysterious. And I'm interested in the reference to, and the title, I'm interested in its reference to alchemy. Are there specific symbols that refer to alchemy, which I don't know anything about, but I wonder if it has a hidden meaning.
Thank you for that question. There are symbols associated with alchemy that I'm not particularly interested in that specificity, but I'm interested in the idea of alchemy, and actually, well, first let me just read the definition of alchemy and comment on why I'm interested in it. So the medieval forerunner of chemistry, based on the supposed transformation of matter. It was concerned particularly with attempts to convert base metals into gold or to find a universal elixir. So I love this idea of transformation of matter, which I feel like is what artists do and as particularly as a mixed media artist that works in collage, I'm using matter to transform it into something that is kind of a sum of its parts. And the idea of turning into gold, like something really valuable, a great concept to me. But then other definition is a seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or almost all my work lately is this idea of transformation, of combining things to come out to have a new outcome. But this particular piece was inspired by looking at a book called The Book of Symbols. I'm fascinated with how everything is kind of symbolic. And so if I'm using something particular, like I wanted to use this dove idea, and I wanted to see like, well, what does it symbolize? But oddly, this came up. And so this is a piece entitled Alchemy. And so it says, a pristine dove descends into dark waters, activating processes that will bring high and low together, from the alchemical manual. I won't attempt to butcher that. But
Philosophorum, Veterum Philosophorum.
Thank you. So when I saw this image, it just kind of stayed with me. And so you'll see if you go back, Susan, to the I'm looking at this idea of a dove, which, you know, the first thing that comes to mind for me with the dove symbol is peace, but then there's also like layers of spirituality, and you know, a lot of times you see it flying upwards, but this idea of it flying downwards into water, but maybe then it's inverted. And so all this kind of magical symbolism is very interesting to me. And then what I hope happens with my work is that you bring your own associations as the viewer. So whatever I'm doing might not be the same experience of it that you're having, because you're bringing your own associations to it, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I certainly, though I think this might be along your ideas too, is that I also find that the materials you use, like, well, you know, we're seeing a picture of it, so it doesn't necessarily come across, but the surface, it's an incredible, like, delicate surface that is, it makes me think of like something almost ancient, like it's coming from another time or the past. And that's it carries an emotional weight. But I respond very much to what you are saying about the symbol of the symbols communicating, but in an artistic way that is not necessarily, we can't put it into a definition. It's also very interesting to see where you are getting your sources. I'm always fascinated by that. And then looking at you know, with these works, there are two smaller works. They're over to the right, and here the scale isn't necessarily apparent, but there are it's quite a contrast. The heart, which is literally bursting forward, this is a somewhat 3D piece, and then the work called Synergy with the overlapping circles. To me, you know, that certainly these also communicate something hidden and mysterious. And I had a question, since there's these come across to me as objects. Do you view your work as like pictures, or that you're making objects that are going to have some effect?
That's also a great question. Thank you, James. So I guess it's best answered by saying I began as a painter, and as a painter, I was always also interested in the objectness of what I was creating. So less interested in that illusion of pictorial space that that I've admired in other painters. But for my work, the fact that it's an object is also very important. And so then I started making wall pieces, and then I made freestanding sculpture, and now I'm like circled all the way back to 2D work again, but I've still always have this tension of wanting it to be an object as well. And so even if I work on paper, I end up mounting it on to boards because I like to have that thickness and that weight and that solidity. And I also prefer, as you pointed out about the surface of the work, I'm really like, that's part of its objectness to me, that to feel the surface. So I prefer to not have it behind glass because that takes you kind of a step away. Whereas different kinds of work, the maybe being behind glass enhances it. So, so I like that you picked up on that, because that is important to me. That feels like an object.
Mhm. Well, as recent works, are you embarking on new themes and approaches to your work? I don't necessarily think approaches, but if this is leading you into new areas, and I guess of symbols in the work.
Well, yes and no, because what I find in the way that I work, that I am not a person that can keep working in exactly the same way. As soon as I start to feel a little bit rote, a little bit bored, I have to change it up. Like, I know it's dead if I feel even that for a second. And so then that makes me like keep trying to find new ways to do things. And at the same time, it's also interesting to me to keep recycling some of the images. Like if you go back to the Synergy, the one that's, yeah, this one, those ant images, I found when I was moving studios, I found a box that had material from like 25 years ago, that, you know, collage stuff that I had collected. And I was like, wow, I can use this again. And so, you know, it's still resonant for me. And the things that I keep for images, like, I'm not even sure why. It's not, there's all different things that draw me to an image, and they show up in the work in lots of different ways, but always to have like some resonance of really body, mind, and spirit. So like the symbolism can, you know, can be like a physical thing, it can be like a spiritual thing, or it could be like a intellectual thing. And it feels most successful to me if all three things are kind of singing together.
Well, that's great. And again, I look forward to seeing where this is going to lead. And I have a, you know, this show has made me think about things in a certain way. Not necessarily eclectic, but I will try to develop this theme after and state it after we look at Juliet's work. So moving to Juliet. Juliet, congratulations, and thank you for bringing this beautiful and, as always, provocative collection of works. In this group show, there it's a series or from a series, and they're smaller works that our installation crew has wonderfully grouped and presented. And could you give us an overview of this work and the series that it is part of?
About 5 years ago, I did a collection called You Don't Look Crazy, which was about my history with mental illness. And very recently, before I started this collection, I had said to a friend of mine that I really wanted to do some new work looking at like a different side of mental health. But then, of course, at the same time, if you know me, you know I love talking about relationships. And right then, I realized that the longest relationship I've ever had has been with anxiety. So the title, Anxiety is a Love I Cannot Break Up With. I don't think anxiety is a good or bad thing. It terrorizes us. It motivates us. I don't know what I would do without it. And these ideas are not spelled out exactly, and that's intentional. You know, I've made these little blocks and I've made these wooden canvases and these animals or creatures and paired them with words of like dismay and discomfort. And they may not make you anxious, but I hope they will make you think about it. And part of that is important in the title. Titles are very important to me. I almost think of them as like cliff notes to the work, or like a doorway. So once you have this title about anxiety, you can see that within the pieces that you may not have seen just approaching them straight on.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I mean, I'm also fascinated by, but I'm fascinated by your titles, that they also create an incredible tension, I think, between what is seen and then also what is understood about the title, which I think it's a tension where we're not necessarily, it's like we're asking ourselves, is this meant to be seen serious, or is this meant to be seen humorously? And I would imagine that it, you know, it's not necessarily, it has to be seen anyway, but it does create a tension, which I think is the what makes the work good. You know, like really it draws you in and makes you stop. Like here, I am collapsing. What is the connection with the tree and going and the materials? I love the titles.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, humor is really, really important to me. It's not that I can't take things seriously, but you know, I don't even, I almost feel like I've never been able to like take things dead on serious and not sort of add a punch in there, or not sort of add like a rib in there. It helps me deal with serious topics. You know, the things that I'm talking about are very heavy, and adding sort of like a humorous side to it makes it a little more approachable and maybe a little more interesting, adds a side to it that wouldn't have been there before.
Well, I have your website bookmarked, where it shows your incredible amount of work, and you know, the installations, the different series, and I know that you've worked with many different materials, but in this work, I've seen that there's some new materials and forms, specifically the glitter. Not necessarily like you've never used glitter, but here the glitter is now kind of like coming forward. And then also the 3D box forms. Very interested in those, which I think of like the tactility of the work growing. Are these new paths?
Well, with every collection that I do, I try to create a new vocabulary and a new way of working with materials. It's always in my voice. And even though they're different, I think you can still see me within each collection. I did a collection called My Eyes Are Down Here, which was a series of women's bodies hanging from coat hangers with eyes on their boobs, and talking about sexual discrimination. The last collection that I had at the gallery, I had falling figures painted on tapestries. So there's always sort of a unique voice. With that, I am super excited about the glitter in the boxes. I actually had not used the glitter before. So I don't know what, I was trying to think back, like, why did I think, oh my God, glitter's fabulous. But I'm so excited about it because it's weird and it's kind of anxiety provoking for me. I mean, a lot of things are anxiety provoking for me, but the glitter sort of like was a little bit agitated, and the boxes, they're like little presents, you want to open them. And what's going to be really difficult is going on to whatever new collection I do, because I still want to use that glitter and I still want to use those boxes, and finding a different narrative with that is going to be a task. I always call that period a weaving purgatory until I figure out my next place. And I have to have a shout out to Catherine Orrock, because I saw those little boxes that she was using, and that's when I started using the boxes myself.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because and I think I've made this comment before, that I don't necessarily view them as boxes. I view them more like as books, because of how even like the sides all over it's written on. And so it's very text driven, like you have to read these, like literally your eyes are going all over them, and not just on the surface, like a painting. So I think of it as like a book. But I
like
guess
that.
on the other hand, a book is a kind of box too. So it has both. Oh, I also really like those glitter pieces. And I agree with you that's an incredible surface. But I hadn't really thought of it as anxiety, but it is a fractured surface. So maybe that's what is giving the anxiety.
Like I said, a lot of things give me anxiety. A lot of things give me anxiety.
So as a concluding question, looking over the group show, do you see links in the artist approaches despite the eclecticism, and your views on the eclectic?
Well, it's a difficult answer to the question. When I was first reading it, and it was like, do you see links? And I'm like, no. All right, next question. But I was like, all right, I'm gonna do this. So I went back and I read everyone's artist statements, and I looked at everyone's pieces, and I came up with 3 new possible titles. The first, all 3 really reference nature in unique ways. Karen's piece, Alchemy, with the dove. My piece, I'm collapsing, with the trees and the wasps. And finally, Joanne's work may not literally portray nature, but her work is an abstract landscape like night sky. So I would say that would be nature in 3 ways. And second, each artist really relies on light, the glittering horse, the light moving from morning to night in Joanne's work, the multiple layers of Karen's work, which creates their own depth and light. So I would call that group Trip the Light Fantastic. And then finally, and this is sort of my favorite, each of the work is very direct and subtle at the same time. The pieces bring the viewer to a question with conviction. I mean, they are very strong and very not aggressive. They are not mild-mannered. They do not tread lightly. They stand quite strong. And that title would be bold.
Yeah, and I respond to that too. And I also see, and I think this is what is great about these project shows is that they're not just exhibits. I think that we use them as ways of creating a dialogue or continuing our dialogue with other artists in this kind of safe setting. Because it's always wonderful the conversations we have. Also, this show has really made me think about, and I see it kind of linked between. It's almost like the work is performance driven. That each of the works is the evidence of what the artist did in the studio. It isn't just like creating a picture, but of what they are dealing with in their, I don't know, like Joanne referring to the imagination and memories, the symbols that and the transformation that Karen speaks of, and then also you with the themes that you have, and I almost feel that you're in the studio and you're like enacting something and then saying, here's the evidence of it. It isn't necessarily just I'm communicating, but it's like, this is what came out, do with it what you want, but I did this. I had to make this. And I think that's what drives artists. We're not necessarily just going to the studio because we got an order to make art. We're in there because we got to do it, whether somebody is telling us to do it or not. For whatever reasons we have to do it. But with these, I don't want to get too serious here. So thank all the project artists. I think it's time to go on to our questions. I see questions are coming in. Now let's see, maybe
Stop the share. Oops.
yeah, we can stop the share.
I'm
I'll
trying
start
to
looking
do
at
that.
the chat. If there are questions, anybody wants to just unmute themselves and ask, this is our time.
I'm having a hard time stopping the share. Whoops. I can't seem to.
I'll go, while you're doing that, I'll go to the, I'm looking at the chats. Joanne says, for Karen, are the landscape images from personal photographs or specific places? Interesting question. I wonder about the specific places.
The images that I use in general are often my own photographs, sometimes family photographs, and sometimes found photos that from the media or books or different places. But the in Synergy, those are some of my photographs from Montana. And it's always interesting because I also take photographs for photographs, and then sometimes I'm like, well, this is a photo, it shouldn't be butchered into collage imagery, but some other photos right away I know I'm going to use for collage. So yeah, that's a mixed answer.
And there's another comment from Janet that this body of work feels, to you, Karen, that this body of work feels healing, and especially with the heart imagery.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Yeah, what I want to say about that is I feel like what my art practice is lately is coping with a changing world. And so reframing that everything changing around us as transformation, and how can I make it healing for my mind, body, and spirit. And I think if I can work with that, it can feel healing, and
Mhm.
and maybe that is part of the subject of my work. So thank you, Janet.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I also related that the heart to the circle symbols, since the heart does have the right and the left, and that they are sharing, there's this circulation of our life force. So that's
Mhm.
how I saw that. The very visceral image. Let's see, from Suzanne asking Juliet, I'm fascinated how you integrate your hand-woven fabric into your work. The fabric adds such texture to your pieces. How do you approach how you choose your fabric to integrate into the story you are telling with your artwork?
That's a good question. I sort of I have all these pieces. Like I have a bucket full of woven fabrics that I've made, and like when I weave, it's very hard to not weave something that's emotional, because I'm so part of the process, and I'm choosing materials and I'm choosing the colors. And then also some of the fabrics that I've used, I've created on my computer and printed them out on fabric using my inkjet printer. And so there's sort of that process. And then there are the drawings themselves. And it's almost like a buffet, like, oh, this would go so well with this. And this looks like it's going to totally conflict. So I'm definitely going to do that. And oh, sorry. Sorry about that. So with each piece, it's sort of like trying to take things that might like fight a little bit, and that sort of combination for me gives it a like a spark, or a taking things that aren't matching and putting them together and making them work as a solid unit.
Thanks, Juliet. That really makes sense. Appreciate that.
Also, I would encourage visiting Juliet's website, julietmartin.com, that and both to see the work, as well as there's a movie showing you at work that helps to see that process. Let's see some comments. Thank you, Helen, for your comment about
Yeah,
my questions.
I'm just going to read that.
Okay.
James, you've done a brilliant job interviewing these amazing artists with a deep understanding of their varied work. Bravo. Thank you so much, James. I appreciate it. Also.
I thank the artists. And a comment from Robin that grateful that we're sharing this on Zoom, and I agree, it makes it easier for everyone, and certainly on a day like this, that we wouldn't want to be trekking down to the gallery, or for those who are at a distance. And from Catherine Acey, congratulations to all the artists. Each of your work is unique and moves me in many different and wonderful ways. I agree. And from Catherine Ark, wonderful to Juliet. Wonderful to see what you have done with the boxes, Juliet. They're interesting to work with, and it does make an objectness of the art come to fore, as in Karen's work too. Yes. Interestingly, all of our work is very different, one from the other. Just a comment. Yeah. And it should be. it should be different, we wouldn't want to all have the same work. Thank you all for your questions from Marna and for the thoughtful questions. Another very interesting presentation, and how all the artists connected to nature, including Susan's, and that's very true. From Jocelyn, it's a beautiful show. Great to hear about the individual artists and their inspiration. And a thank you from Catherine. Oh, and from Janet, that comment to Susan about documenting trees. And she mentions she knows one of the trees that you have painted got cut down recently.
Yeah, sadly, the
which
one
is
that's on the invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Janet was asking how important it is to document the trees, and I think that it's become more and more important to me. Maybe partially because of the fact that trees aren't always necessarily around forever, but also because because they have been around for so long. It's really nice to sort of see them in one facet and then revisit them, at another point. And that's another thing that I think I'll probably add to this series, revisiting some of the trees to document them at different times.
Yeah, I think that trees are very important, which we're not always that aware in the city. There's this contrast that the city is not nature. You have to go out of the city to encounter nature, which being somebody who's always been in the city, I don't quite see that. I actually get nervous when I leave the city. But I find there are trees everywhere, and I love encountering trees. I almost see them as people, or they have personalities.
They do.
And in their movements, I think of them as beings. And the fact that for many of the trees, they actually are here longer than we are. They have many of them have very long lifespan. Like I'm sure that linden tree that you have
It's been around, yeah.
picture, it's been
It's
around
witnessed
for
a lot, I'm sure.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So to hear when a tree is cut down, that is almost sad, or
Very.
tragic to hear.
It's true.
So
I would just like to add one thing. I've been a member of 440 now, I think for about, I don't know, 7 years maybe. But I think that as an artist, something we're always longing for is communication. And I think one thing about being part of this group of artists at 440, we get to hear each other, we get to see each other's work. And I think that you're never too old to stop learning and new approaches and new ideas and new media. So I'm very grateful to be a part of a group of people that I'm still learning. And I mean, even some days I go into my studio and I'll think of one of you and I'll think, oh, I remember what you said or what you shared. And this whole thing about trees, I mean, I love trees and I draw trees all the time, but to see different approaches and different ideas, it only comes when you're communicating with many people. So I'm very thankful for that.
I second that. Yes. So any other comments, questions?
I have one last question for Susan. What was your favorite season to paint?
Oh, that's a great question.
Did you have it? Maybe you did. Go ahead.
It's funny because every season, like the next season, I go, this is my favorite one, and I would get excited about something. But, here I am now coming back to autumn. And I have to say, I think autumn was the thing that just grabbed me, and it still grabs me. There's just I don't know, there's just such surprises that happen, and the color is just so amazing. So I think I'd have to say autumn.
Great season.
It reminds me of the song from Camelot. If ever
Oh,
I,
with
and
leaves, right?
I
Yeah.
actually like the winter trees, like
Mhm.
my work is often very line oriented.
Mm.
And I like looking at trees in the winter when they are stripped of the leaves and you
Yeah.
see all their lines.
I love that too,
Yeah.
it's, yeah. And you see all this tangle happen that you wouldn't, there's just all these tangled branches and, and like as you had said, about trees having personality and real presence, then they have a completely different presence, so
That's
it's
true.
kind of exciting seeing that.
Yeah. I wonder if they're embarrassed in the winter.
oh, very
It's like, don't look at me, not now. My
I've never
wife
seen-
always says,
I've
yeah,
never seen an ugly tree.
that's true. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'm sure we could find one.
James, I see one more question for Susan there.
Okay, let me back.
Mary Ellen Tip.
Oh, I don't
From
see.
Mary Ellen, I resonate with your love of trees, Susan. And like James, I'm in awe of plein air painters. How do you decide on the spot what stays and what goes as you paint on site? Also, I love your peekaboo white on the page, and I agree with that. Yeah. At what point in your painting do you decide how much of that will stay?
That's a great question too. Thank you, Mary Ellen. I think it's, I mean, at the very beginning, you kind of have, with watercolor, you have to decide where white will stay, because once you cover it up, even if you cover it a little, it will never be white again. So, you really have to kind of train your mind to think about where you want whites to stay. But things come up and things change, and, like any artist, you're editing constantly, you're having I'm having a dialogue with a tree, but I'm also having a dialogue with myself. So a lot of the choices happen as I'm going along. It's also always it's a challenge, in terms of what stays white, what little spots of white I want to leave, but also how much can I play with the paint before it becomes dead? The thing about watercolor is you just have a certain amount of layers that you can go before, it really knocks the light out completely. So it's always, I think that's something that I really love about it, that you just have this sort of certain amount of time or a certain amount of layers before it goes too far, or at least goes too far for me. So it's always that challenge that sort of keeps me excited.
Susan, were all the paintings or all the watercolors in the exhibit done in one setting?
Oh, good question. Let me think about that. Yes, every
Yeah.
single one. Yeah. So, some of them take longer. Some of them are very quick, but yeah. And it's kind of back to what I was saying before. Every day is different, and things look different for all sorts of reasons. And so if I will work on things in my studio in relation to what I worked on outside, but the paintings that I do outside, it's really just that moment, it's that experience of that day.
Well, any last comments or questions? I mean, there are a couple things I have for announcements. Well, first, that the present show to every season and Eclectic Visions will be on display through Sunday, November 19th. Though as on November 12th, let's see. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, did I have this wrong?
What is it that,
November 12th, we will have our music, our monthly music event, me, myself, and I, in the afternoon, with the bassist Stephen Crump, and this is a free and open to the public event. It starts at 4:40, so you can always think of 4:40 at 4:40. And those and they're really nice opportunities just to come and listen to some very interesting musicians, quite a range of musicians. So that's November 12th, which is a Sunday. And then our next exhibit will be the 440 small gallery, small work show, opens on Thursday, November 30th. This is our annual small work show. The curator this year is Grace Friedman, and this is a national juried exhibition. And I know there's going to be, I think, over 80 works in our small space. So that promises to be a fun show. Oh, so that opens November 30th, but the opening will be that's Saturday, December 2nd. And normally our openings are 4 to 6, but that information will be on our website. Then also, Juliet Martin had said that her series, My Anxiety is a Love I Cannot Break Up With, that she had mentioned, will be displayed in April at the nonprofit, not-for-profit space, 5 Miles Gallery in Crown Heights.
Great.
And
that's-
I assume that we'll get the more specific dates and times, and that will be sent out. And then also just a quick mention that my solo show will be January 10th. So mark that on your calendars of our new year. That will be the first show of the member show of the new year. And anybody else have any events that are coming up, shows or anything they want to mention before we break? We did have a very busy last weeks with the show that Fred Benhigh at 160 Underhill that some of us participated in, and then also and we all thank Fred for that, and also the Gowanus Open Studio weekend that I hope the artists who were showing then have recovered from that. There was a huge event.
Barely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, James. This was really wonderful.
Really
All right.
wonderful. Thank you.
As always, it's fun, and I will see you.
Thank everybody for spending
Right.
time with
thank you, everyone.
Okay, talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Sure.
everyone.